Hey everybody, it's Ron with the Aurora Chasers bringing you another episode of our weekly live stream workshop series. In this week's episode, we're going to cover the editing portion of the reflection shots that we did last week. So if you missed that, be sure to check out that video and we'll delve into this one. All right, let's get started. Hey everybody, how's it going today? We're bringing you another episode of our live workshop series. This week we are going to delve into a little bit of editing. We're going to kind of make this a little more casual than the last few, but we're going to delve into some of the editing from last week's photo shoot. So hopefully you guys got to do some photography of your own and shoot some of these reflections and practice up a little bit. But we're going to be playing with those shots we did last week and kind of do some editing. All right, so let's get into it. Let me load up Lightroom first. We're going to be working in Lightroom Classic again, and then we're also going to be working in Photoshop a little bit today. So we'll delve into some of that stuff. We're not going to go into a real big in-depth tutorial about Photoshop. That's a massive program. I used to teach that at the university in Alaska, and that was a semester course just to get an intro into Photoshop. So we won't go into great detail about it, but we'll cover some basics and show you how to use a few tools to do some of the fine polishing on these images that we shot last week. So let me back out of this larger preview. I have kind of loaded up already our images from last week and selected the ones that I thought were the best. And so we're going to filter those down to just the picked images, and then we'll start editing them. It looks like we got about 6. And then if we have time at the end, we will grab a few of those shots and we'll composite them together just like our intro screen here, so that you guys can kind of see how to use layers and layer masks in Photoshop. So let's get started with our first image. We're going to do our pre-edits here in Lightroom, and then we'll take them into Photoshop for the fine-tuning. And let me show you what I mean by that. So there's a lot we can do right here in Lightroom itself, starting with exposure and things like that. But there's some little bits of things here, a little hair that was on the shell I didn't see when we shot it, some little, I don't know, markings on the shell. Things like that we can clean up. And that's honestly, we can do that here in Lightroom, but it's much easier in Photoshop. And I'm going to show you guys content aware tool if you haven't already learned how to play with that. Really useful tool. We did a pretty good job on our exposure overall. I would like to bring the shadows up. So let's go ahead and bring this into the development module. And first thing we're going to do is just pull the shadows a tiny bit. Actually, we'll bring them up a lot. Now, we don't want to go so much that we're starting to get all this stuff back, so we're going to bring the shadows up and then the blacks back down. And then I think we'll actually bring our exposure up just a touch. That's looking nice. Now we can see a little more detail in the shadows of the shell, but we're also not picking up all of this background here. I would like to change the composition just slightly, so we're going to straighten that a little bit. And we're going to we want to keep as much of that reflection as we can. We're going to kind of shift that centered. I usually don't center them, but in this case, I kind of like it because of the reflection and because we're probably going to pull this image in later for a composition. So I'm trying to think about that as I move forward with the edit. So double click to set that. And then the next thing we're going to do is go to our next image and kind of pre-edit it as well. So this one, you can see there's a little bit of junk here, a little hair there. We'll clean that up in Photoshop as well. Looks like we need to straighten this out just a touch. Something like that. And then I think we're going to just bring that in. I want a little more headroom in the front of the car than behind the car. Something like that. Let's actually bring that down just a touch so we have a little bit more of that reflection, a little more headroom on the bottom there. And let's add a little contrast. This one could use some contrast. I'm going to pull the highlights down just a touch. Something like that. And otherwise, maybe a little blacks in there and boost our shadows just a tiny bit. And I'm liking that. This one could use a little bit of clarity and perhaps, well, you can see my kiddo abuses his cars there, and perhaps a little bit of sharpening. So let's go ahead and boost the texture just a bit. And then let's get into our sharpening. And again, just like always, I'm going to start off with a mask. So I'm going to hold the Alt key and drag my slider, my masking slider, until I'm just seeing kind of the edge details there. And then we're going to do the same thing with radius, holding the Alt or Option key. And I want a little bit more, something like that. And then we'll drag our sharpening up just a touch. That's looking pretty good. Now we got a lot of nice crisp detail there. I'm actually going to go back to our shell image and do some detail work as well, because I think we could use a little more texture and sharpening there. So bringing the texture up, in this case quite a bit, because it is so shiny that it can handle a little more. And then we'll mask off our sharpening till we're just seeing the edges of our shell there. And then we'll check our radius, and radius could use some work. And then we'll bring our sharpening up just a touch, something like that. Okay, let's get into this strawberry image. This was my favorite of the bunch. Really like the way we had the kicker light, the edge lighting there, and then the fill light on the top right here looked pretty good. So we're just going to straighten that out a bit. And in this case, I think we could grab the exposure, bring it up just a touch, so we're getting a little bit more of that strawberry in detail. I'm going to bring the blacks down because now I'm starting to see that seam between my background and the glass cutting board that we were using last week. So pull the blacks back down. You see that takes care of that pretty well. And otherwise, it looks like just some cleanup and some detail. So let's go ahead and add a little texture to this one. And this one can handle quite a bit. It really looks good with some texture on this one. And then let's go ahead and sharpen this up a bit. So again, masking, holding Alt or Option. And we just really want the seeds to kind of pop out of that. Check our radius here. Bring that up a bit. And boost our sharpening a little bit. There we go, looking pretty good there. And let's move on to our Kiwi Shot. Now this one was a little tricky because we had a very light subject compared to a somewhat dark subject, and so getting lighting was a little tricky. If you tuned in last week, you probably remember I stuck a lens cap underneath that Kiwi to prop it up, so we're going to take care of that when we get into Photoshop. You can kind of see that lens cap popping through there. So we'll do a little bit of detail work on this in Photoshop. This one's probably going to take the most work of any of these shots. We're just going to kind of adjust our composition a bit. Something like that. And this case, let's boost shadows, pull the blacks. And I think we could use a little more light in the strawberry. So let's play with a tool that I don't think we have played with yet, which is our brush tool. We're going to go into the brush and we're going to just adjust shadows and exposure a bit. So I'm going to bring my shadows up a little bit and my exposure up just a bit. And then I'm going to take my brush right over my strawberry here. Just careful to not get into other objects. And we're going to bring out a little more detail in that strawberry. And now I kind of lost some of that contrast, so I am going to bring the blacks back down and the contrast back up a touch. Something like that. And let's see what happens if we play with exposure. There we go. Now we're exposing more close to that Kiwi, looking pretty good there. All right, let's go ahead and get out of our brush tool and let's finish the edit. So we're going to add some texture here. And let's see what happens if we add a little, I like a little more highlights there. In this case, I think because our Kiwi is a little on the darker side, or I mean a little less saturated than we'd like, some vibrance would probably help a bit. So we'll bring the vibrance up, and now we'll go into our details panel. And again, we're going to mask that off. Something like that. Check our radius here. And bring our sharpening up a bit. There we go. And I notice we got a little Angus, our puppy, left one of his hairs for us, I see. So we'll take care of that after in Photoshop as well. This one, like I said, is going to have quite a bit of detail work. So we'll probably spend the most time with that one over in Photoshop. Okay, moving on to our next image. This was our Truly Seltzer can. And this one I'm actually pretty happy with the lighting. I think overall I would boost the exposure a bit. That's going to oversaturate my can. So we're going to actually pull highlights and then boost exposure. And now we're looking pretty good there. A little bit of contrast might help this one. And I might pull those highlights a bit more. Something like that. Again, add some texture here. Touch of vibrance. Not a whole lot with this one because we've got some pretty nice saturation this time in the Kiwi. And we're going to mask again and sharpen. Check the radius. Maybe bring that up a touch and sharpen it up a bit. Something like that. Okay, I think that one's going to work. A little bit to clean up here, but this one's not too bad. Got a little bit of, looks like some debris or something on the can itself. And then this is our whiteboard strawberry. We had some nice light because we were using white, as you can see, but there's a little hair here we need to take care of. We could do that a couple of ways. If I didn't necessarily care for my composition, I could always just crop that out. That's a pretty quick and simple solution. But I kind of want the strawberry a little off-center in this case. And so I'm going to leave that in and we'll just clean it up after the fact. So we'll straighten that one up. Bring that back just a touch, something like that. There we go. Okay, and then back into our basic settings. I'm going to boost shadows just a bit on this strawberry because it's kind of a higher key image. I want to see a nice, bright, crisp image. We'll add a little more contrast to get some of that texture back. We'll add some texture in. This one doesn't need near as much. And let's see what happens if we get crazy with the vibrance. A little bit of vibrance there would help. And then let's go ahead and sharpen this one up as well. So masking it off. Right about there. Check our radius. We could add a little more. And playing with our sharpness. And there we go. Okay, now we're ready to take these into Photoshop. So if you have both Lightroom and Photoshop installed on your machine, it's really easy to take files back and forth. The way that I do this is just select my image and hit Control E. And that's going to open Photoshop for me if it's not already. And then it's going to take a moment and it's going to load this into Photoshop. So we've got our shell loaded up. And now we are ready to do some editing. So let me show you guys where we're going to find our first tool. First tool is going to be the Content Aware tool, Content Aware brush. And you can find that over here if you right-click on these options. You can see we have a Spot Hilling Brush tool, and that is set to Content Aware. We have a Hilling Brush tool, which is a different beast entirely. Patch tool, Content Aware Move tool, and a Red Eye tool. Now, the Red Eye tool you can use in Lightroom, and it honestly works pretty quick and easy, and I don't typically come into Photoshop for that, but this Spot Hilling tool I love, and I'll show you what it does. So we're going to take these little spots here, and all I'm going to do is just run over them, and you'll see it just starts to clean all of that up. Now, if I hold my spacebar, I'm going to zoom in hitting Control Plus, so that we can really get into the detail. And if I hold my spacebar, that gives me the hand tool, which allows me to move this around easy. So then the next thing I do is just find little spots like that. And you can see this does a really fantastic job for cleaning this up. Now I am using a draw tablet, so you'll notice my brush is quite big in relation to my what's actually happening with the tool, and that's because it's a pressure sensitive pen or stylus. And so I can adjust the brush size just by pressing harder or lighter. Let me undo that. Control Z undoes that. But you can also just adjust your size with the bracket key. So if I go bracket down, it makes the brush smaller, and if I go bracket up, it makes the brush larger. All right, let's get rid of that little funky hair. That kind of bothers me a lot. And we got to be real careful about getting on that edge. A little bit of those highlights is okay. Something like that. And then we got this big spot here we're going to take out. Got a couple little spots in here. And you can see if you're doing just tiny detail work, this Content Aware works really well. There are times where it does not. So you kind of have to figure out how to use it. It takes some practice, but once you kind of get it dialed in, most of the time, if you do smaller adjustments, you'll find it's quite successful. If I was to try to grab like a big portion of this shell and clean it up that way, it's not going to work quite as well. It's going to do some really funky things, and it's just trying to rebuild based on the data around the subject. And so the more you can give it to work with, the better it's going to work for you. Okay, a little bit of a hair right there. Let's clean that guy up. And then let's get rid of all these funky little spots in our background. These are those dust spots we were trying to keep cleaned up, and you can see how a little bit of dust really makes quite a mess out of your shoot. But luckily with this tool, it's fairly easy to clean that stuff up. Something like that. Get rid of our hair and our reflection as well. And as you can see, we had a nice detailed reflection there, which is kind of awesome. All right, a couple little spots in the, whoops, too big of a spot. I pressed a little too hard with the draw pen. Got something funky going on there. So you can see this content aware tool really, like I said, if you're doing fine detail work, it does a fantastic job of just kind of cleaning stuff up pretty quickly. There's another dust spot on our glass cutting board and another one. Let's see what we've got over here. Looking good. Couple spots here. Big one there. And let's zoom back out. Control minus or command minus. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I think I'm pretty happy with that overall. Let's give you guys a little idea of another tool that might be useful. Let's say that we had gotten a little bit too much light spilled on our backdrop and we didn't have this nice complete blackness. So I'm going to make a quick adjustment. Let me make a jump layer. So Control J makes a duplicate layer here, just so that we're not messing with the original layer. And we're going to make an adjustment here and kind of bring the overall brightness of this image up a bit. Let's do that in our, actually not in our midtones, let's do that in our shadows. All right, so I'm just going to bring that up so we're getting kind of gray in the backdrop. And I'm going to show you the dodge and burn tools real quick. Maybe I want to make this all solid black. And so maybe some of this was a little overexposed. Some of it was really nice and black. And so it's not quite right. If I go into my dodge and burn tools here, I've got dodge, burn, and then the sponge tool. Dodge tool will brighten things up, and you can select, if I was trying to brighten things up, I can select which range. So do I want to brighten the shadows, the midtones, or the highlights? And then at what percentage do I want this to affect it? Do I want it to protect tones? I usually do, but you can play around with that. Protecting tones is going to try to salvage or keep your color intact. But in this case, what we want to use is our burn tool. So burn tool is doing the same thing, but it's actually darkening things instead of brightening them up. And in this case, we want the shadows. And we want to be careful about how much we adjust this, because a little bit goes a long way. So I'm going to start off with 10%. And then let me show you what happens as we kind of play with that in the screen here. You can see it just starts to darken things up. And in this example, specifically, because we have this nice highlighted edge around our shell, we can actually get right in close to that. And as long as we're not overlapping that with the middle of the brush, it's going to do a really nice job of just polishing up those black tones. And then once you've got those kind of nice and dark, if you wanted to, you could go into your brush tool, bracket it up to make it really nice and big, and you could just finish by painting in the rest of that. But you can see what happens if I do that with the brush tool around my shell. It kind of covers everything over. So if I hit the O key, which is my dodge and burn tools, then I can just kind of polish only the parts I want to around that. And once I've made my outline around that, I can fill the rest in with the brush or even the paint tool or the paint bucket tool. I'm not going to do the whole thing here. I just wanted to show you guys that. That's kind of a handy trick if you were to need to do that. But let's go ahead and just delete that layer. And we're looking pretty good on this one. So a couple of different options you can use to send this back over to Photoshop. But what I honestly do is flatten my image. I hit Control W to close it. And then it's going to ask me, do I want to save the changes? And in this case, I do. So I hit yes. It disappears, but don't worry, when we go over into Lightroom, you can see now we have two different versions of that same file. We have the TIFF, which Photoshop just created for us, and we have our original Lightroom file. So there's our, whoops, just stack those up. There's our TIFF all cleaned up, And there's our Lightroom version with all the junk in it. Okay, so let's bring our car in, and we'll do the same thing with that. So again, Control E to open that up in Photoshop. And now when we go into Photoshop, because it was already loaded, it's much quicker and it's already kind of there. So let's go ahead and Control plus plus to zoom in a bit. And let's take care of some of this detail. So we're going to go to our J tool, which is our content aware tool. And let's clean up that little hair there. Let's see if we can fix the paint there. It may or may not. There we go. And sometimes if you just kind of work it a little bit, then you can see I got the edge back on the wheel well there, which is kind of what I wanted. See if we can take that paint chip out. Now, if I wanted to spend a lot of time, I could fix this. I'm not going to do that for the sake of this demonstration. It's not critical, but if you wanted to, you could go in and do some work with that. Sometimes it's better to use a clone tool for things like that. Take that little hair out of there, take the reflection of it out, and just kind of clean this up overall. Whoops. Clean up a little detail here. We'll get into the hood of this guy. There we go. And you can see, I'm not going to get terribly detailed with this, but you can see you can really fine tune it and you can zoom in more and get even more detailed if you want. And just really clean it up and do a nice job there. And if you ever do something you don't like let's say maybe I got too big here and I kind of wrecked that wheel, Control Z just undoes it just like in Lightroom. Command Z if you're on a Mac. Let's see if we can polish this up a little bit. So again, you can see if you kind of work it a little bit, sometimes you can get pretty decent results. It may not work the first time, but just keep working at it. And sometimes you can clean it up really well that way. Let's take that spot out. Got a few dust spots on my monitor, so it's hard to tell sometimes if I'm actually affecting the image or if it's the monitor itself. All right. Let's see if we can fine tune that just a bit. There we go. It's kind of crazy. You don't realize how flawed or dirty these little things are until you put them on a macro and put them on a big screen. Whoops, messed with the stripe a little too much there. There we go. A couple of bubbles in the paint looks like on that logo. We'll see if we can touch that up a bit. All right. A little more spots right up here. Back that up. Got a little heavy-handed with the brush again. There we go. Something like that. Let's back it out and see how we're looking overall. Okay, I'm happy with that. So I'm going to hit Control W, tell it to save. And now that one's going to be in Lightroom. Let's do our strawberry. And then we will do our kiwi and strawberry because that one's going to take the most work. And then we'll show you guys how to composite this stuff together. Okay, I think we're looking pretty good on that one. Fairly simple. Let's back it out, see how it looks overall. Yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with that. All right, Control W, close it and save it. And now let's bring in the challenging one. So let's grab our strawberry kiwi and go ahead and hit Control E to load that up into Photoshop. Okay, first thing that's driving me crazy is this little hair. That does not look appetizing to me at all. Let's get rid of that. There we go. I did a pretty good job. Little spot there. Check the rest of our kiwi surface. That looks good. Okay. This is going to be a little tricky. So I'm going to kind of start around the edge here. And let's just see what happens if we drag that along there. I think I can live with that. I'd prefer to have a few more of those little kiwi hairs out there, but we'll deal. And then same thing down here. Now here we've got a little more room to work. So I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller and try to get this first little bit. We may have to select that whole thing. Let's see what we get. That actually did a pretty decent job. Let's try to just kind of fine tune that up a bit. Make it a little more realistic. There we go. And it's a little out of focus looking, but that's okay. We were shooting with a macro lens, and at this close up, everything falls off. You can see here out of focus pretty quick. If you really wanted to spend some time with it, you could probably really detail this up. It's really, in the grand scheme of things, not that relevant, so we'll leave it as is. Got a little something on our strawberry there. Clean these spots up. And we got a bunch of junk over here we need to clean up. Just like that. Let's see how we're looking. Actually, I'm going to leave that. That looks like a little water droplet. I'll take that little white spot out. There we go. And then let's clean the rest of this up down here. And we should be all set. Okay, let's zoom back out, see how we're looking. Much better, and that actually went a lot easier than I thought. Pretty happy with that. Okay, let's close that one down. Make sure we save it. Go back into Lightroom here, and let's play with our Truly can. And then our white strawberry, I don't see that we have, we got a little bit of detail here, and we could get rid of this line across here. So we'll deal with both of those. All right, so let's load this one up into Photoshop. Again, Control or Command E. Going to zoom in, hitting Control or Command Plus. And this one, I really want to take care of some of these details on this can. That looks like a little kiwi hair got stuck to that. And I don't want to lose this perspiration. I kind of like the way that looks. It looks like a nice cold beverage. Definitely makes me want to drink it. So we'll try to preserve as much of that as we can. There we go. Little things like this you can always fix. Okay. Let's take care of that too. So you can actually just use the edge of that can like that, and it'll usually kind of rebuild it as long as you're subtle with it. All right. I think that's a water drop, so I don't want to mess with that one. Let's go ahead and clean our mess up over here. A couple little details to take care of right here. And down in there, and then quite a bit of junk that fell off that kiwi here, so let's go ahead and clean that up as well. There we go. And while we're doing this, guys, if you ever miss one of these and you want to tune back in and you want to see it kind of in the polished version where I cut out a lot of the dead space and things like that, or where I'm just rambling, be sure to check us out on YouTube, youtube.com/the Aurora Chasers. Usually the week after we do this live, I publish these videos over to YouTube, and I spend some time and go in there and polish them up as well before we produce them. So it's a much more condensed version, and then you can follow along right there and kind of learn. So if you've missed any of the past ones, check that out, and you can see them in the nice condensed version. Okay, I think we're looking pretty good overall. Let's have a look here. Yeah, pretty happy with that. I'm ready to have a drink. All right, let's go ahead and close that and save it. And then let's bring in our white one here. All right, little strawberry. Come on in. So Control E again. And not a lot to clean up on our cutting board. Let's zoom in, just double check all that. Couple little spots. But because we're doing white, everything kind of, it's basically high key, and so everything kind of blows out, so there's not a lot of detail. Opposite of what we did with the black cutting board. Makes it really nice. Okay, that we needed to address. Done. This kind of bothers me. So we're going to bring in our dodge and burn tools into place here. So in this case, we're actually going to use the opposite. We're going to use dodge tool. I'm going to set the exposure up to 10% there. And we're going to see if we can dodge some of this out. That might be a bit heavy, because then we're going to have to do that with the whole thing. But let's go ahead and do that. We'll show you guys how that would look. So we're going to go right down into that shadow there. I want to leave that detail there. Just kind of blend it. Zoom in a bit. And we'll do the same thing here. Make our brush a little smaller for working around this stuff. And so you want to be kind of careful to not, basically just don't get your brush into the details that you care about preserving there. Something like that. Now we can go a little larger, try to keep that shadow. Basically what I don't want to do is lose my reflection there. Something like that, and then let's go ahead and finish this detail work up, and then we'll just fix the whole darn thing. So if you're doing a lot of high key, low key stuff, I mean, this is a useful tool for just general tone control and things like that, especially in black and white images. But I use it a lot when I'm doing these kind of low key, high key shots. If I got a little light on my backdrop that I didn't want for, say, the black backdrop, or in this case, as you can see, if I got the white one, and I need to tighten up some of the exposure there, and I really want it to look kind of just solid bright white. Now we can go a little bigger with the brush. Just like so. Check this side, make sure we're good there. Believe we are. Okay, kind of liking that. I think I might come back into this shadow and just detail that up a touch more. Let's go ahead and follow that all the way down. Something like that. Okay, nice high key strawberry. So we'll go ahead and close that out. Save it. And now let's bring in a few images together and do a stacked kind of composite. So let's see, which ones do we want to play with here? Let's bring in our seashell, make sure we have the edited version. So I'm going to flag that. We're just going to give that a 1-star rating so we know which is which. Play with our car here, the edited version, 1-star rating. And our strawberry. And again, a 1-star rating. Okay, so now I'm going to go back up and select just my 1-stars. So I know which ones they are. Hit Control A and then Control E. And it's going to ask, do I want to edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments? Just edit a copy or edit the original. I do want the Lightroom adjustments had I made any. So I'm going to go ahead and select that option. And then we'll go into Photoshop, and that should load all 3 of those up for us. Now, if I select my Move tool, which is the V key, I can move these different elements around. So the first thing I want to do is decide which element I want to be the centerpiece of all of this. In this case, what I'm going to do is put the car in the middle. So first thing I need to do is I need to expand the canvas around this if I want to bring these other elements in, because it's not quite large enough. So we're going to go to Image, Canvas Size, and then what I want to do is adjust the width of the image. So I can see right now I'm at 30. And I want to give myself plenty of space on either side of that. So what I'm going to do is expand the width another 60 inches. Okay, and then we're going to set our anchor point right to the center so that it'll expand 30 this way and 30 this way. If I wanted to expand it just on one side, I could anchor it on this side, or vice versa if I wanted to go the other way. If I was doing height, I could do the same thing. I could pin it to a corner, things like that. But in this case, I wanted to expand equally on both sides. So I'm going to anchor it right in the center, and then I'm going to hit OK. Oh, one other thing. What is the canvas color? I want it to be black in this case because that's what the rest of our stuff is. So I'm going to hit OK. And now I'm going to zoom back out and you can see what that did. That gave us lots of extra room to kind of play and bring some other elements into the shot. So let's go ahead and do that. Now let's decide which elements we want where. So which way is my strawberry? I think the strawberry, because of the way it's oriented, and the shell because of the way it's oriented, I think the strawberry is going to look best on the left side of the image. And I think our car is going to look best, our shell is going to look best on the right side. So let's go ahead and bring this in. So we're going to click it and drag it up to our other tab. And we're just going to drop that in there. And we can reposition that. Now, for the sake of showing you guys layer masks, I'm going to bring this in a little extra too close. And I'll show you how to deal with that in a minute. Let's go ahead and grab our strawberry. And we'll bring it into the shot as well. I think I did that opposite of what I wanted. So we're going to take our strawberry over here. Going to grab our shell and bring it over here. So we're just going to overlay that just a touch. And the same thing on this side. Because let's say we want it to be a nice tight shot. Okay. So I've got this funky looking black stuff here. Now I could do a couple of things. I could erase all of that stuff, but the easier way to do that is with layer masks. Because each of these is its own layer, I can set up a mask to erase just the parts I want. So I'm going to create a new layer mask for each of these layers. And let's work on our strawberry first. So by using the brush tool on the layer mask itself, I can erase parts of this. And it's really nice because if I have the black tool, so B is for the brush tool, and if I have black set as my primary color over here, it's going to erase things like that. And you can see in this case that works really well, makes life just easy for us. And you don't see a seam there or anything because everything's black around it. If I got somewhere, maybe I got into the strawberry and I needed to bring that back, if I hit my X key, watch what happens to my paint canvas over here. It switches the colors. And so white will paint the mask back in, and then hit X again, black paints the mask out. So it's basically just erasing it, but without doing any erasing there. So I can just bring my strawberry back in, and then we're good to go. So same thing, we're going to go down to our next layer. We're going to make sure we have our layer mask selected, and we're going to use the black paint scheme to just erase out those parts. And again, if I got a little too close, hit X, and I can bring that detail back and just paint it back in there. So if you're ever compositing layers together, really handy way to do that. Especially maybe I've overlaid something here and I need to paint different parts of it out, but I want to leave some of the other details in the background. You could reduce the opacity of your layer. So let me show you how that looks. So let's take this layer right here. We'll reduce the opacity to say 50%. And then if I had this right over top of the car, for example, I can see through it. So I can see what parts I want to erase. I'm going to just undo that. And we'll set our opacity back up to 100. Just like that. Now we need to go ahead and crop this. I am going to move this over just a touch for the sake of composition. And then we're going to just crop what we don't need off the edges of this now. There we go. And about right there. Actually going to drag this side out just a touch more. Something like that. Hit enter. It's going to do its magic, save that for us, and then we can hit Control W and save. Now when we go into Lightroom, as soon as this finishes saving, that'll pop up. And there's our finished product. So that's how we build that. So next week, guys, we are going to be working on a lighting workshop. So just like last week where we did this reflection shot live with multicam setup, we're going to attempt it again. Hopefully it goes at least as well as the last one, maybe better. Maybe a camera won't quit in the middle of it. So we'll give that a shot. It's just going to be an intro to lighting. So we're going to show you a couple of different lighting devices, some light modifiers, talk about lighting ratios, the inverse square law of lighting, and maybe do a couple of quick shots showing you like a key light and then a fill light. Probably just a simple one light setup first and then a two light setup. Maybe we'll pull out three lights, but it's not meant to be a very in-depth discussion on lighting. It's just going to give you guys an intro to it, kind of give you an idea. Again, we'll talk about the gear we use, but we'll also talk about some alternatives that you can use. As you guys saw from our reflections workshop, we do try to give you some budget-friendly options, and there certainly are some budget-friendly options out there if you don't have speed lights or the money to buy speed lights or things like that. So we'll try to come up with some of those for you too. And then, like I said, in June, we'll see. I'm going to try to keep the weekly live streams going, but I'm really wanting to devote a significant amount of my time to finally getting that Aurora film produced. And that content takes quite a bit of work. So I'm going to spend a lot of time there. I'll let you guys know as we get closer to that if I think I'm going to be able to budget time to do this weekly. If not, we'll at least do it bi-weekly for the month of June. Thanks again, guys, for tuning in. We always appreciate you being here. And if you missed last week's episode, go ahead and check back for that. Next week, we're going to cover an intro to lighting where we're going to discuss how to set up 1, 2, 3, and even a bonus fourth light. and we'll teach you the gear that we use and how to make that all work. All right, guys, we'll catch you next week.